Okay, so you're interested in emotional intelligence. And specifically like EQ and leadership. Well, we're diving deep today into this interview with Daniel Goleman. Yeah, the Daniel Goleman.
Yeah.
The EQ guy. He's talking with Jacob Morgan, who's a leadership expert. And they really break down like what EQ even is, why it matters at work, and how to cultivate it. I learned some surprising things, especially about the whole 23andMe, those empathy gene tests.
Yeah.
Some interesting stuff there.
It's interesting how Goleman kind of frames EQ right from the start. He talks about being intelligent, about emotions, so not just letting your emotions run wild, but actually understanding them, managing them and using them to your advantage, which seems kind of counterintuitive.
Right.
Like, how can emotions and intelligence work together?
Yeah.
And that's actually what drew him to the concept.
It does seem counterintuitive. We tend to think of emotions as these kind of messy things
Yeah.
that get in the way of clear thinking and logic.
Right.
But he's suggesting they can actually be assets.
Exactly. And it's important to note that he didn't actually come up with the term emotional intelligence.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
It was Peter Salovey, who is actually now the president of Yale.
Wow.
And John Mayer.
Okay.
But Goleman's book really popularized the concept.
Right. He brought it into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And one of the most impactful ideas he brings up in this interview is why EQ is so essential for leadership. And he has this really fascinating definition of leadership, where he says, it's not about your job title, it's about influence. So anyone who impacts others, whether it's your family, friends, colleagues, you're essentially a leader.
Right. It really kind of broadens our perspective on who we consider leaders, takes it out of the boardroom.
Absolutely.
And puts it into everyday life.
Absolutely.
And that kind of leads into his idea of the contagion effect, which I found fascinating. It's this idea that leaders' emotions are contagious, so they directly impact the team's performance. Good vibes boost results. Negativity brings everyone down. He even links this to the Great Resignation and says that bad bosses, often lacking in EQ, are a big reason people are quitting their jobs.
Oh, that makes so much sense. I mean, we've all experienced that, right? Where a leader's mood can really just set the tone for the whole team. Now, thinking about that classic debate of EQ versus IQ, I feel like we all know at least one person who is brilliant, but just a total disaster when it comes to people skills. So where does IQ fit in all of this?
Well, Goleman says that. You need a certain level of IQ, of course, for specific roles. But once you hit that baseline, EQ becomes the differentiator. It's what really sets people apart in terms of their success.
So are you saying that someone with high EQ but lower IQ could actually outperform someone with a high IQ but low EQ?
Exactly. Think about like a field like sales, for example. Someone with really high EQ might excel at building those relationships and closing deals, even if they don't have the highest IQ on the team. On the flip side, you could have someone who's super smart but has low EQ. They might struggle to collaborate effectively, despite their individual brilliance.
That's a really interesting point. It makes you realize how much we overlook the importance of emotional intelligence, especially in professional settings.
And to illustrate this, Goleman tells this great anecdote about a friend of his who worked in executive recruitment, and this friend noticed a pattern. That people were often being fired for EQ lapses, not for a lack of technical skills.
Wow, that's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah.
So, okay, it's clear that EQ matters, but it's not just about being nice.
Right.
Are there specific EQ competencies that are particularly crucial for effective leadership?
Absolutely. And Goleman goes beyond just empathy and self-awareness, which is what a lot of people associate with EQ. He identifies 12 key EQ competencies for outstanding leadership. And these fall into categories like self-management and social awareness.
Okay, let's unpack that a bit.
Yeah.
What does he mean by self-management? Is it just like controlling your temper?
It's more nuanced than that. One example he gives is the competency of reality testing,
Okay.
which is the ability to see things as they are, not as we wish they would be.
Oh, interesting.
So a leader with strong reality testing can objectively assess a situation, even under pressure, and not let their own biases or wishful thinking cloud their judgment.
Wow, I can see how that would be absolutely critical for making sound decisions, especially as a leader. So what about social awareness? I'm assuming empathy is part of that, but
Yeah.
is there more to it?
Yeah, empathy is definitely a key part of social awareness, but it's not the whole story. Goleman highlights things like organizational awareness, which is understanding the politics, and power dynamics within a company,
Right.
and service orientation, which is a genuine desire to help others. These are all crucial for building trust and creating a positive work environment where people feel supported and can collaborate effectively.
So we're getting a clearer picture
Yeah.
of what these competencies look like in action. But how do we figure out where we stand? Like in terms of our own EQ,
Yeah.
are there tools we can use to kind of assess our strengths and weaknesses?
Well, Goleman and his colleague, Richard Boyatzis, they developed a tool called the Emotional and Social Competence Inventory, which is essentially a 360-degree feedback assessment
Oh, interesting.
where people who know you will rate you on these key leadership competencies. You get feedback from your boss, your peers, your direct reports, maybe even family and friends, to get a well-rounded view of your EQ strengths and areas for development.
That's a really smart approach.
Yeah.
I can see how getting that outside perspective
Okay.
is so valuable. But this brings up that age-old nature versus nurture debate.
Right.
Can we actually develop our EQ?
Yeah.
Or are we just stuck with whatever emotional wiring we're born with?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating. You mentioned those 23andMe empathy tests earlier.
Yeah.
Goleman actually pushes back against the idea that EQ is purely genetic. He
Mhm.
firmly believes that it's something we can learn and develop,
Right.
even if we might have certain predispositions.
I mean, some people would argue, though, that temperament is largely innate.
Yeah.
How does he address that counter-argument?
He acknowledges that some people may have a natural inclination towards certain traits, but he really emphasizes that experience and conscious effort play a huge role.
Okay.
He points to brain plasticity, which is the brain's ability to change
Yeah.
and adapt throughout our lives as evidence that we can rewire ourselves. Emotional.
It's not set in stone.
It's not set in stone. It's like learning a new language
Right.
or a musical instrument. It takes dedication and practice.
So it's really about being proactive
Yeah.
and intentional
Right.
about our own EQ development. That's empowering to know
It's
that we're
not
not
right.
just at the mercy of our genes. But let's get practical. What are some concrete steps we can take to boost our EQ?
Well, Goleman stresses that a genuine desire to improve is really the foundation. Without that inner motivation, no amount of tools or techniques will stick.
That makes sense.
From there, he recommends honest self-assessment, maybe using tools like that 360 feedback we talked about. And then it comes down to consistent practice and finding the right support.
Yeah.
Coaching can be incredibly helpful, as can peer groups, or even just having a trusted friend or mentor to bounce ideas off of.
Okay, but what about those quick fix solutions we see everywhere? You know, the boost your EQ in a weekend workshops? Do those have any merit?
Goleman actually calls those out as the spray and pray approach. He argues that a one-off lecture or workshop just isn't going to cut it. Real lasting change requires ongoing effort. It's
Right.
like exercise, right?
Yeah.
You can't expect to run a marathon after one trip to the gym.
That's a great analogy. So it's about integrating these practices
Yeah.
into our daily lives, making them part of our routine. Speaking of daily practices, let's talk about managing emotions in the moment. You know, we've all been there. You're about to walk into a high-stakes meeting, and your anxiety is through the roof. What are some specific techniques we can use in those pressure cooker moments?
Goleman offers some really practical strategies. One of my favorites, and this might surprise you, comes from Special Forces training.
Oh, wow. Tell me more.
It's a simple breathing technique.
Okay.
You inhale for a count of 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 4. Repeat that 6 to 9 times. And it can actually shift your physiology from a state of stress to a state of calm. It's like hitting the reset button on your nervous system.
I love that. It's so accessible, something
Yeah.
anyone can do anywhere. What other techniques does he recommend?
Another simple but surprisingly effective technique is to name the emotion you're feeling.
Okay.
Literally say to yourself, I'm feeling anxious right now, or I'm feeling overwhelmed. It sounds too simple to work, but bringing awareness to the emotion actually shifts brain activity from the emotional centers to the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for managing emotions.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
So just by acknowledging the emotion, we're already taking a step
Yeah.
towards regulating it. What about mindfulness meditation? I know Goleman's a big proponent of that.
He is, and for good reason. He says even just 5 to 10 minutes a day can have a huge impact on your emotional resilience and focus. Over time, it literally strengthens the part of your brain that helps you manage difficult emotions.
Interesting.
So you're less reactive and you recover more quickly when you do get triggered.
You know, I've tried meditation on and off,
Hmm.
and I have to admit I struggle with it. My mind erases. Thoughts pop up like popcorn. Does Goleman acknowledge that it can be a challenge for some people?
He compares it to exercise. The more you do it, the easier it becomes. And he emphasizes that. It's okay for your mind to wander. The real skill is in noticing when it's wandered and gently guiding your attention back to your breath. It's not about emptying your mind. It's about developing a sense of awareness and control over where your attention goes.
That makes me feel a lot better about my meditation mishaps. It's a process, not a perfection game.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about a situation I think a lot of us have probably faced. Dealing with a boss who seems to lack EQ. We can talk all day about being more emotionally intelligent ourselves, but what if the person leading the team isn't modeling those behaviors?
That's a tough one, and unfortunately a common one. Goleman cautions against directly confronting your boss and telling them they lack EQ.
Right.
That's almost guaranteed to backfire.
Yeah.
But he does offer some strategic options.
Okay. Well, I'm all ears. How do we navigate that minefield?
One approach is to try to find an ally, someone your boss respects,
Yeah.
who might be able to offer feedback in a more subtle way, someone who can nudge them towards greater self-awareness without putting them on the defensive.
So it's about finding a more indirect route. Someone who can influence them without causing blow-up. What other strategies does he suggest?
Well, he also half-jokingly suggests updating your boss's resume and sending it off to a recruiter.
Uh-huh. I love his sense of humor. But on a more serious note, I think what he's also highlighting is that we're not powerless in these situations. We have choices.
Right.
We don't have to stay in a toxic work environment.
Exactly. Life is too short to work for someone who's constantly creating negativity and drama.
Yeah.
And sometimes the best solution is to simply remove yourself from the situation.
Okay, so we've talked about developing our own EQ
Yeah.
and navigating challenging situations with low EQ individuals. Now let's flip the script. How can we spot emotional intelligence in others? Are there any telltale signs or behaviors we can look for?
Goleman points to several key indicators. One of the most obvious is likability. People with high EQ tend to be well-liked and respected.
Right.
They also tend to be good at emotional regulation, meaning they don't constantly vent or spread negativity.
Right.
They're able to keep their cool under pressure and don't let their emotions hijack their behavior.
That makes sense. We've all worked with
Yeah.
that chronic complainer who just sucks the energy out of the room. It's exhausting.
Right. And another big one is self-awareness. People with high EQ have a realistic understanding of their strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
They're able to take feedback without
Good.
getting defensive and are genuinely interested in personal growth.
So they're not walking around with
That's-
blinders on,
Yeah.
oblivious to how their actions impact others.
Exactly. They're in tune with their impact on the people around them.
Okay.
And finally, they're really good at building connections. They make others feel seen, heard, and valued. They're the kind of people you just feel good being around.
It sounds like they're really embodying a lot of those leadership qualities
Yeah.
that Goleman talks about.
That's right. And this leads us to an interesting concept he calls the resident leader.
Okay, tell me more about that. What exactly is a resident leader?
So it's a term he coined in his book, The Awakened Company. And resident leaders are all about fostering connection, purpose, and growth within their teams. They're not just focused on hitting targets and meeting deadlines. They genuinely care about the well-being of their team members and create an environment where everyone feels supported and empowered to do their best work.
I love that. Think about the best boss you've ever had. Did they embody some of these resident leader qualities? How did that impact your experience and the overall performance of the team?
It's a powerful concept. It really gets to the heart of what authentic, emotional, intelligent leadership looks like.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I've gained a whole new understanding of emotional intelligence and its significance in both our personal and professional lives. It's not just some fluffy feel-good concept. It's a real skill set that can make or break our success in life. What about you? What are some of the key takeaways that are really resonating with you?
Well, one thing that really stuck with me was Goleman's emphasis on the fact that emotional intelligence isn't about suppressing our emotions or pretending to be happy all the time.
Right. It's not about
So-
putting on a mask
Yeah,
or becoming some emotionless robot.
exactly. It's about understanding our emotions, how they work, how they influence us, and those around us, and then how we can manage them in a way that serves us and helps us achieve our goals.
I love that. It's such a crucial distinction. It's about harnessing the power of our emotions, not
Right.
pretending they don't exist.
Right. And he also makes it clear that emotional intelligence isn't just about being nice.
Yeah.
It's about being effective in our interactions with others, building strong relationships, inspiring those around us, and creating a positive and productive environment.
It's about leadership in the truest sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the best part is, it's something we can all cultivate and develop, regardless of our starting point.
I think that's what's so empowering about it. It means we're not stuck with whatever emotional patterns we've developed over the years. We can choose to be more emotionally intelligent. And in doing so, we can create a more positive and fulfilling experience for ourselves and those around us.
Exactly. And he offers so many practical tools and insights to guide us on that journey. And one thing he stresses is that's an ongoing process.
Right.
There's no finish line when it comes to emotional intelligence.
It's a journey, not a destination, which is actually pretty exciting. It means we can always strive to be a little bit better, a little bit more in tune with ourselves and others.
We're all works in progress, emotionally speaking. And that's okay. The important thing is that we're committed to the journey and that we keep learning and growing.
So for everyone listening out there, what's one small step you can take today to be just a little bit more emotionally intelligent? Maybe it's trying that Special Forces breathing technique when you're feeling stressed, or taking 5 minutes to practice mindfulness, or maybe it's just being more intentional about acknowledging the emotions you're feeling throughout the day.
Maybe reaching out to a colleague and asking how they're really doing and truly listening to their response, or taking a moment to reflect on how your words and actions might be impacting those around you.
Those are all fantastic suggestions, and it's those small, consistent actions that over time can lead to a profound shift in our emotional intelligence and ultimately our overall well-being.
It's about becoming more aware, more intentional, and more skillful in navigating the often complex world of emotion.
Beautifully said. So go out there and be a little more emotionally intelligent today than you were yesterday. And remember, you're not alone on this journey. We're all in this together. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of emotional intelligence. We'll catch you next time for another insightful exploration.